Good afternoon / good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this second edition of our EU-India Relations series, jointly hosted with the Center for Strategic and Defense Research. My name is Jochen Luckscheit, and I'm the director of the Heinrich Böll Foundation's New Delhi office. Today's session focuses on the EU's Global Gateway Initiative and its potential to advance EU-India priorities and ambitions in the Indo-Pacific region. As the policy brief that will be presented here today highlights, the Global Gateway, which was launched around 2021, is more than a development tool. It reflects the EU's ambition to assert itself globally by entering sustainable and transparent infrastructure partnerships. India, with its growing economic and geopolitical clout, is a natural partner in this effort. Both India and the EU share a commitment to connectivity that is rules-based, inclusive, and regionally responsive. Yet, while frameworks such as the EU-India Connectivity Partnership exist, on-the-ground implementation, at least at this point, has not been very visible, raising important questions about how to accelerate these shared ambitions. With this in mind, today's discussion will explore how the Global Gateway can align more closely with India's Act East policy or Indo-Pacific vision, and how it might gain traction by working through regional platforms such as BIMSTEC. A core feature of this policy brief series is our decision to pair for each of the research papers one author from India with one author from Europe, which we also have done in this case. It expresses our commitment to fostering mutual understanding through collaborative analysis, especially as India and the EU seek greater policy convergence. Dialogue between thinkers and practitioners alike from both regions appears essential. Also would like to take the opportunity to thank the two authors for the great paper they put together. And of course, the other two speakers with us here today for making their time and insights available. Thank you for joining us for this session, and I look forward to the discussion ahead. And with that, I will hand over to Devika from CSDR. Thank you.
Thank you, Jochen. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today, my name is Devika, and I work at the Council for Strategic and Defense Research, and I would like to welcome you all again on behalf of CSDR as well. Very brief introduction about CSDR. We are a New Delhi-based think tank. We combine sort of global and regional expertise to deliver tailored interventions rooted in rigorous research and experiential knowledge. Our expertise broadly covers foreign policy, geopolitical risk, defense, geoeconomics, climate change, tech policy, to name a few, with regional expertise in the Indian subcontinent, Eurasia, and the Indo-Pacific. So we are very delighted to be hosting this webinar on the Global Gateway, Advancing EU-India Priorities in the Indo-Pacific with HBS. This is part of our collaborative policy brief series on India-Europe relations, advancing policy alignment. So today we are also formally launching our second report of this series around the Global Gateway that's been authored by Dr. Julia Turkovic and Riya Sinha. So, and our attendees can find a link to the report in the chat here. So without further ado, let me quickly kick things off by a brief introduction of our speakers. As our moderator, we have Ambassador Gayatri Kumar, who is a former Indian Ambassador of India to the UK as well as the EU. Welcome, Ambassador. We have Ms. Riya Sinha, who's an Associate Fellow of Foreign Policy and Security Studies at the Center for Social and Economic Progress in New Delhi. Welcome, Riya. We have our other author, Dr. Julia Turkovic, who's Deputy Director, Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy at in Brussels, and Assistant Professor in EU Foreign Policy at the Free University of Brussels. Welcome, Julia. And of course, we have Mr. Reinhard Bütikofer, who is currently Senior Advisor at the European Policy Center in Brussels, but also a former member of the European Parliament. Thank you so much for joining us today. Quick housekeeping notes. I request our panelists to keep the opening remarks to 5 to 7 minutes. Post the opening session, there will be a moderated discussion. And after that, we will open the floor for questions from our attendees. So please use the Q&A box to raise your questions for the moderator's consideration. That's all from me. I will now hand over proceedings to Ambassador Kumar. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. My greetings to everyone. It's indeed a great privilege to moderate this discussion. I thank the Heinrich Böll Stiftung and CSDR for this invitation. And of course, I offer my warm greetings to the esteemed discussants and the virtual participants. At the outset, I'd like to congratulate the authors of the report, Dr. Julia Terkovic, Ms. Riya Sinha. You've made some very pertinent observations. I read the draft version of it and some very, very good recommendations. I'm also delighted to be virtually meeting again Mr. Reinhard Bütikofer. I knew him when he was member of the European Parliament, and I had the privilege of interacting with him in Brussels and in Strasbourg. I'd like to start by heartily agreeing that strategic synergies is an apt way to describe the partnership and the potential of the India-EU triangular cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. Our collaboration as strategic partners has made us leverage our many complementary strengths. And we have decided and we are working on extending our bilateral agenda to a trilateral format. And we feel that this is an obvious win-win-win proposition, that is for the EU, India, and the other participating beneficiary states. From India's point of view, of course, we have ancient linkages with the ASEAN and Indo-Pacific region, and we have always emphasized the importance of focusing on development rather than expansionism in this region. We've been quite consistent about this principle and quite vocal about this principle, that we support the building of a rules-based regional architecture in which the main pillars are maritime security, ecology, capacity building, disaster management, science, trade, and connectivity. We feel they are most relevant, and these are the areas where India has a lot to bring to the table. And we also believe that, and this is becoming very important in today's context, that maritime activities must align with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. There must be freedom of navigation and also free and open airspace. So there has to be an effective code of conduct. And across the board, our initiatives for engaging the Indo-Pacific region are always aligned with the ASEAN's Indo-Pacific outlook. And again, here, India and the EU regard ASEAN as central to the Indo-Pacific vision and, of course, the Quad cooperation. And we have, as a member of the Quad, also endeavored to see that the Quad agenda is similarly oriented. And Quad, we are happy, has made it clear that it opposes any unilateral actions to alter the status quo in the region by force or by coercion. The EU's Indo-Pacific policy, I'd just like to quickly comment, is more strategic. It started, as Mr. Johan mentioned, as a global infrastructure development scheme, an instrument to project influence in the global south, with a regional focus on Africa and the Indo-Pacific. And, it is seen that the China's Belt and Road Initiative was a key motivation from the geopolitical and geoeconomic point of view of the European Union. And then we have the 5 thematic areas of focus: connectivity, digital transformation, climate resilience, clean energy, quality transport, infrastructure, health, education, and research. Now, these are all areas where, as the subject of our discussion indicates, there are policy alignments in our vision for our engagement with this region. The EU, like India, aims to forge links and linkages rather than dependencies. So here's another way of area where we converge. And as we know, 300 billion euros is to be mobilized by 2027. Africa will leave half the total funding. 255 projects have been taken up, and 360-degree project packages will include financial support and technical assistance, ecosystem reforms, and skill development. The idea is that you create infrastructure and capacities that attract further trade and investment and skills development. So it becomes a kind of a continuous process. And it's relevant to mention over here that in her second term of office, the European Commission President has given a major impetus to the global gateway, nuancing it by prioritizing European economic, geopolitical, and security interests. So there is a more strategic orientation right now. Regarding the alignment, again, I would say that though we may differ in our strategic outlook in some ways, there is definitely a significant synergy and a policy alignment. We are both committed to an inclusive and sustainable Indo-Pacific. And then we've taken every opportunity, we've reaffirmed that we both agree that there has to be we have to support the Indo-Pacific in being free, open, peaceful, and prosperous, a vital player in a rules-based international order where there must be mutual respect for sovereignty and peaceful resolution of disputes, underpinned by effective regional institutions. And this part is becoming all the more relevant as the center of gravity shifts towards our region and with Indo-Pacific as a area of focus. So in our initiatives, India and the EU, whether it's the connectivity partnership, whether it is the BIMSTEC agenda, whether it's the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, then our trilateral cooperation, in all these areas, we find that the agenda is very much in consonance with both our respective agendas are very much in consonance with each other. And here I'd also like to mention the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, all very relevant to this region where India has the expertise, the experience. EU is a huge donor, a huge trading partner, and very much active in contributing and providing the technical, financial, and institutional support that is required. And again, this is an area where we ourselves are working involved in a very deep way with the beneficiary states and the partner states. Then we have the IMEC, which is the India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor, which will create a unique connectivity corridor. And then we have the India-EU Trade Technology Council, in which, again, we are promoting connectivity projects in third countries where the focus is on the most relevant technology right now, where we would like the partner countries to leapfrog, for example, semiconductors, high performance computing, digital public infrastructure, clean energy technologies, supply chain resilience, where India is an eminently dependable partner and an eminently experienced contributor. So we have complementary strengths again, and we have our public and private investment geared, roped into this, so that technology, renewable energy, and digital connectivity projects are given the required the strength and the financing and to get them going. But the road is not without hurdles, and we'll hear more about that from our speakers. From insufficient buy-in by EU member states, bureaucratic slowness maybe on both sides, and then India's limited capacity to deliver on the large-scale cross-border infrastructure, where we are still developing our ability and capability. So all these issues are covered in the report written by the two authors of the report, our speakers. Their recommendations are worth a good look, and the rationale for a closer India-EU collaboration and alignment in this area is quite compelling. So let's hear from the authors of the report, Dr. Julia Terkovic and Ms. Ria Sinha, and hear their assessment. And then I will invite Mr. Reinhard Butikofer to share his views on the Global Gateway project, and then questions to the panelists, after which, as Devika mentioned, I'll open the floor to the audience. So, Dr. Julia Terkovic, over to you.
Great, Ambassador. Many thanks for the great introduction, and let me also thank the Heinrich Böll Stiftung Foundation for giving us this opportunity, to CSDR, of course, for the great leadership on the report, and for Devika in particular to keeping us on track in terms of time. And of course, I also want to thank my great co-author Ria. This period has been very challenging for both of us, but we were really committed to have this report out before the summer because we thought was important. Why important? From the European perspective, the Indo-Pacific has become a very relevant and important region, despite many discussions about the need to prioritize and the fact that Europe cannot be active and effective in all regions of the world. The Indo-Pacific still remain since 2021 and the launch of the European Union strategy with the Indo-Pacific remains a key region with which we really need to engage. So in the past year, the discussion has been really like, why should Europe care about the Indo-Pacific? Why it's important? How do we explain it? How do we see it? How do we define it actually? But in more recent year, in the more recent period, the discussion has been more moving from the why question. So why do we need to engage with Indo-Pacific to more the how question? So how can we engage more? How can we as European be more helpful for the region? And how can we really build on partnerships that already exist and try to make them more efficient? So it is part of this big discussion that, of course, the partnership with India comes in. India is a very important partner for the European Union, and recent visit from President von der Leyen and the entire group of commissioners to India as their first trip show that interest in really bringing the partnership to the next level. And why do we need that? India remain an important actors in terms of, as Ambassador was saying, in terms of some of the values that we share, but at the same time also in terms of the economic dimension of it and the need to preserve some forms of supply chain resilience, which is something that in Europe we experience some disruption of it, and that kind of awake us and make us more aware of which are the partnerships that we really need to strengthen to make sure to preserve this aspect. Now, the cooperation with India is not the simplest one. We disagree, or at least we are not fully aligned on some big strategic goals or some big strategic issues with which we see things differently. Still, despite that, even if we're not fully aligned strategically, there are important objectives where we see convergence. And this is what we try to highlight with RIA in the paper as well. We really try to focus on the element of convergence and the objective where we can really try to work together. In the paper, and I'm not gonna now, tell you all the different elements. RIA will also build on some of them, but I strongly suggest you to read it. We try to come up with some specific areas where cooperation can be reinforced. But of course, there are also some challenges that we identified, and I think this is something that Europe should, and India as well, will need to focus on in the months to come while they discuss how to bring this cooperation further. And the first one is from the European perspective. Of course, the institutional fragmentation that sometimes is perceived in India. So the European Union is a very complex animal, we know, with different institutions, with different initiatives. So sometimes from our partners, it's complicated to understand how things are organized. And of course, this makes it a bit complicated, or at least raise the challenge for cooperation. So I think from a European perspective, trying to be as clear as possible about what the institutions are, what are we prioritizing, what are the different roles, still remain an important element. The second point is the bureaucratic complexity. That is something that we also identify as one of the challenge, specifically for the Global Gateway Initiative. The fact that access to some of these projects and some of these projects are very complicated makes them less appealing. And we know there are other actors that have similar initiatives that makes life much easier for implementing these projects. So this is also something we should maybe reflect on how to make and how to reduce the bureaucratic complexity. That it's part of big organizations, of course, so it's not something we can completely cancel, but at the same time, this is becoming an impediment. And then the final element, and then I'll stop here. We identify some areas for further cooperation. We also believe it's important to preserve some areas where debate and discussions between European Union and India can continue on how to prioritize certain initiatives. We believe that we cannot cooperate on all fronts, that there is a need to invest on those aspects that are more promising, because we need to see advancement as well. If there is no advancement on certain projects, if there are no advancement on certain initiative, the risk of really losing traction is pretty high. And this is another element we identify as a potential challenge. I'll now give the floor to Ria, who will also further expand, providing more the Indian perspective, but also building on more on some of the specific areas that we identify. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dr. Terkovic. I now invite Ms. Ria Sinha to please make her presentation.
Thank you, Ambassador Kumar, also for the kind words on the report, and also to my co-author, Dr. Julia Terkovic. I think this opportunity was a good one to really, from the EU and Indian perspective, to really for both of us also to understand how can we work together, what are the areas of priority. So in that sense, thank you to HPS and CSTR for giving us this opportunity. I'd like to focus on the Indian perspective. Why India is, I mean, Julia mentioned that India is an important partner when it comes to global gateway and its engagements in the Indo-Pacific. But what is that? But from what perspective is India coming into this, and how India is working with the EU, how India is embracing the global gateway as something that is to provide development opportunities in the Indo-Pacific, but particularly in its own neighborhood, because most of India's priorities in terms of connectivity agenda, in terms of engagements, are really focused on its immediate neighborhood, what we call the South Asian region, but a lot of it is concentrated on the Eastern South Asian region, or even sometimes or by extension, the Bay of Bengal region as well, and by extension to the extended neighborhood, ASEAN, and so on. So most of India's policy frameworks, for regional connectivity fall under this neighborhood first policy framework, the Act East policy for connectivity between South Asia and Southeast Asia, but also on the maritime front, the Mahasagar, the full form of which I struggle to keep up because we have a lot of acronyms these days. But the Mahasagar Initiative, which is an extension of the security and growth of all in the region, focus on India's maritime neighborhood as well. So in this triad of policy frameworks, where India is focusing on is building infrastructure in its neighboring countries, digital cooperation, increasing development partnerships. One of India's strengths in this area is the large-scale projects, of course, that India has been focusing on, but also the small development projects. And I think this is where it finds synergy with some of the global gateway projects as well that are focused. For example, something that we map in our report, in Nepal, in the education sector, for example, India has been building schools and vocational facilities in Nepal through the small development projects, also and an extension of it called the high impact community development projects. So most of the concentration of India's project is in its neighborhood, about 70% of which actually goes towards building infrastructure in the neighborhood. Now, India has been doing this on the basis of a grant for many, many years, slight change in modality over the last couple of years in terms of focus on lines of credit, which are a form of concessional loans. But India, in this sense, in the last 15 years, has also faced increasing geostrategic competition from China, with increasing Chinese investments in India's neighborhood. In fact, CSEP is just launching a report called China in South Asia to really map everything, and it's not just infrastructure investment, but really in other areas also, how China has increased these engagements. And this has increased competition in India's neighborhood, not only to keep up with China, but also to focus on delivery. What has changed, and in a good way, is that the delivery of Indian projects, a lot of legacy Indian projects in this neighborhood, has improved. We are seeing newer forms of connectivity emerging, not perhaps at the scale at which China's projects are coming up in the region, but at least, in the form of increasing number of land ports, increasing digital connectivity, petroleum pipelines. We see this new areas of connectivity emerging between India and the neighboring countries. The next step for India to do this, for Connectivity 2.0, and this is where the Global Gateway also comes in as an essential part, is India is focused on working with like-minded partners in its immediate neighborhood. If we speak about the same, the same context about like 15 or 20 years ago, perhaps India was not so much comfortable in having external partners in its neighborhood. But today that scenario is changing. That is something that India wants to pursue. That is a demand from the neighboring countries in the region as well, to have diversity in terms of partnerships, to have diversity in terms of financial mechanisms, in terms of the expertise that is brought in. So in that way, India working with EU, there are several convergences with the EU in terms of working in the Indo-Pacific, looking at the free and open Indo-Pacific, a rules-based order, even the areas, the sectors of connectivity that India wants to work on, they all align very closely with the EU. Now, India and EU have been working for past several years together through different mechanisms. But bringing it all under the umbrella of Global Gateway, I think it's a good way as a framework to go forward in this. Another way that India is working on connectivity is through regional and sub-regional organizations. And Ambassador Kumar, you also alluded to this. BIMSTEC is an essential part of India's regionalism in the Bay of Bengal, in the eastern part of the neighborhood. SAARC was active for a long time, and EU has been engaged with the SAARC, but there are limitations in engagement and how much SAARC can work together. So BIMSTEC is seen as the alternative platform. There's, of course, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, International Solar Alliance. India is also engaged in building these new institutions for cooperation, for countries to come together, because they are a platform for convergence of different kinds of expertise that can take development to these, particularly to the smaller countries in the neighborhood. In our report, we also identify priority sectors, transport corridors, digital infrastructure, and green energy as something that EU and India could prioritize in terms of going forward, in terms of aligning their coordination under the Global Gateway. And there are several mechanisms that they can work for this, including one on establishing a joint project prioritization mechanism. Global Gateway already has 255 projects, 6 focused on the South Asian region. There is a need to do more in the region, but doing more doesn't mean doing a lot. Doing more means prioritizing within these sectors, working with different institutions, working even with multilateral institutions, for example, in terms of aligning with the project so that there's no duplication of efforts, and it'll help strengthen and enable New Delhi and Brussels to coordinate their efforts better. Another recommendation that we make in the report is for both New Delhi and Brussels to leverage their complementary strengths through institutional coordination. What India brings to the table is regional familiarity. This is India's neighborhood that we're talking about, right? India is familiar with the political and geopolitical context and how to work in these neighboring countries for many, many years. And these are complex countries. Some of these are fragile countries. So the operational realities in these countries could be very different, let's say, than other parts of Southeast Asia, or even in the Gulf, or even in Africa. So that is an expertise, India's regional presence, the political relationships. That's something that India brings to the table. And when combined with something like EU's regulatory standards, sustainable financing, and project government mechanisms, this is going to create a good framework for both New Delhi and Brussels to coordinate their efforts, to going forward with the Global Gateway. I will leave it to Julia to focus on the next set of recommendations and conclude our presentations. So I'll stop with mine here.
Thank you. If I may, Dr. Julia, I would now turn to Mr. Reinhard Bütikofer, and then you could come in with your remarks. Mr. Reinhard Bütikofer, as member of the as a former member of the European Parliament and former co-chair of the Greens in the European Parliament, it's a pleasure to have you on board, and also a great privilege to have your insights you had welcomed the initiative when it had first been introduced, and you actually regarded it as a very positive path for moving away from dependencies that could be weaponized against the European Union. And with your insight into the European Union's strategic vision in deepening the Global Gateway project, I think it would be very nice to hear your remarks. I invite you to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kumar. It's great to meet you again in this way. I also want to thank the Heinrich Böll Foundation and CSDR for initiating and facilitating this kind of exchange, because indeed I believe that all that has been said in the beginning by you, Ambassador, about the possible strategic synergies, all that I can just sign on to. But when we see opportunities, we must remind ourselves that there is no automaticity. And I would indeed say that some of the formats that have been created in the past to facilitate a more thorough exchange and collaboration between the EU and India have not been utilized to their full potential yet. In the report that I very much cherish, the connectivity partnership is being mentioned. That was, if I remember correctly, was initiated in 2021, not 2020. But this has been mostly an empty suit. Forgive me the stark expression.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Me?
Yes, Mr. Butikofer, I can hear you here in Bangalore.
Okay, good. Then I will continue. And maybe you can see my video again. Also, the TTC, the Trade and Tech Council between India and the EU, that was started in 2023 by President von der Leyen and the Indian Prime Minister, has not been
sorry, Reinhard, I think it's better if you switch off your video. The quality deteriorates with your video on.
I would also mention that presently this great idea, this great
Mr. Jochen, I think we need your help over here.
I switch it off.
Yes,
yeah,
this is better now.
That's better. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. The great IMEC idea has presently little currency in Brussels.
Reinhard, if you can maybe find a different spot
I'm really
with better
sorry
reception.
for this.
Because yeah, it's breaking.
I don't know
We're
whether I
losing
should
you.
continue or whether you hear me at all.
We hear you now again, quite clear. Let's try
Somebody say
again.
whether they hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. What about the others?
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh gosh.
Are the anchors getting a feedback from
Oh,
a
gosh.
positive feedback from the other viewers? Is everyone
don't-
able to hear?
Well, if we can't hear
Okay.
him clearly, then everyone will have problems with that. So maybe Reinhard, if you can find a slightly different spot.
What's the
and then
last you heard?
that IMEC doesn't have much currency in Brussels.
I will try. Yeah, as far as I know, there's no real dealing with the perspective of IMEC at the moment, even though I think, despite all the regional difficulties that we all know of, IMEC is of a great geopolitical relevancy and should be pursued. Do you hear me again?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. So, as I said, we need to show ambition in order to make our hopes of strategic synergies and strategic collaboration come true. And I also believe that we need focus. One of the problems that I see with Global Gateway Initiative in the last 3 years is a certain lack of focus, but we can certainly, if we take the geopolitical implications into account, we can certainly understand where we should put the most attention. And from a European point of view, I would say that developing resilient supply chains, developing good digital connectivity, developing energy projects should certainly be among the highest priorities that we invest into under the Global Gateway Initiative. There's a lot of criticism around Europe of Global Gateway now and then, saying there is more talk than walk. But I would insist, as the president of the European Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, said just recently at the 4th conference on financing for development in Sevilla, in 3 years under the Global Gateway Initiative, around 180 billion euros have been invested. If you consider that the overall goal has been to invest some 300 billion over 7 years, we might be on track of overshooting the original goal, which is certainly a positive promise. I believe that we should combine bilateral, trilateral, and plurilateral initiatives under the Global Gateway framework, and that we should base all our collaboration on the understanding that we want to create a network of trusted connectivity. The term like-mindedness has been mentioned, and I subscribe to that. The motivation for the European Global Gateway Initiative was not in the least just the idea of projecting more European influence globally. It was, to some degree, the idea of combining self-defense against over-dependencies on one side with collaboration with third partners that would also want to avoid being dependent on one or two dominating actors on the global stage. So the basis is an alignment of interests, that can then be transformed into practical steps that benefit local populations in all the countries involved. And the one thing I like the best about the paper that has been presented is its final part, where the authors, boil down to practical proposals about how to push forward the activities that are still obviously scarce, and there is much room for improvement. Your practical ideas are, I think, very valuable because, as I said before, we cannot just rely on the fact that we have some frameworks that sound nice. We must make that come true, and that is where I would also make a comment regarding the criticism of fragmentation. In the paper, you say that the fact that different member states play different roles might be complicating the situation. I cannot deny that, but on the other hand, I think there's no way of getting around this, because if we do not involve individual member states, the Global Gateway Initiative will not thrive. And the institutional capacity of the European Commission is not so mighty as to enable them to be a central actor that coordinates everything. So we need a certain measure of decentralized activity. But of course, there's no formal hindering that, for instance, India and Italy would engage more deeply than India might want to engage with others from the European, all under the framework of the Global Gateway Initiative. So I do share the overall perspective, but I want to emphasize that as far as I can see, there is much more goodwill so far than there is real progress. So I hope that our conversation contributes to creating more ambition in order to walk the talk.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Butikofer. And I have a quick supplementary question for you. I just wanted to say that, you've made some excellent points about, sort of greater, how, India and the EU can align better by combine and have more, outcomes by combining bilateral, trilateral, plurilateral initiatives and creating a network of trusted connectivity. I thought that was very well put. And also the fact that it's important to bring in more robust participation by the individual member states. I wanted to ask you, is there any way that you feel that there can be better, more effective oversight by the European Parliament, especially in project selection, the funding and monitoring the progress, and then also on funding and performance indicators. On these points, if there is oversight by the European Parliament.
So far, as far as I can tell, there has not been very much specific oversight over the projects under Global Gateway by the European Parliament. I'm sure we could improve that. Parliament oversight over development financing overall has been low in comparison to what you see in other parliaments, I would say. But this is, in my assessment, not the most pressing institutional concern. I would think it would be very helpful if the individual EU member states that want to be involved with Global Gateway would all create positions for Global gateway envoys to have a one-stop shop kind of approach to coordinate the different activities from the public and the private sector and civil society involvement, and then collectively create a body that pushes ahead. The governance structure of the Global Gateway Initiative so far is not very effective, I would say. And of course, if you get member states more involved in addition to the European Commission, then also national parliaments can exercise their oversight competency. And I think that altogether, if you have a kind of phalanx of parliaments pushing for that, that would be very effective.
Thank you. I must say that you have touched a very, very important point and with your answer, I think we could even have a separate session on this because, you know, there is a need to preserve the global gateway's distinct character, that it is different from the BRI. But in the BRI, there is an ownership. There's one ownership of it, and there is one entity giving the direction. Whereas here it's again, you know, with so many, you know, sort of institutions and participants and stakeholders, there really would be a need to not only use transparency to set it apart, but also its governance. On that, I would invite the other speakers, Dr. Julia and Ms. Riyatina, you know, if you'd like to comment on that. But I'd also like to take the opportunity of having the you know, floor to put to Dr. Julia what gaps exist in the strategic, developmental, and geopolitical you know, aspects of the Indo-Pacific initiative. How can we fill these gaps in the Indo-Pacific? How do we enhance triangular cooperation? And how do we make sure that we overcome the issues that Mr. Butikofer just mentioned to enhance the triangular cooperation in the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, thank you very much. And to you, Ambassador, but also to Rainer Butikofer, which always provide very thought-provoking points. And I think what you shared with us here is really core and to the point in that sense. As I was saying, the Indo-Pacific is an important region. We don't engage as European at the same level with the entire region. And there is the element, of course, of mindedness that was mentioned. So there are partners with whom we feel more familiar, that we know better, and with whom we work more. There are countries that we struggle to engage with, and there are partners like India with whom we really would like to engage more, but we struggle a little bit. And I think here what Mr. Butikofer was saying, it's really spot on in terms of Europe needs to be really, and I'll try just to take my main takeaways from your point. Europe needs to be really intentional in its commitment to India and in really bringing forward this cooperation and really, as you said, walk the talk. So moving from two general you know, very good sentences and willingness to engage, but then not really performing. It also needs focus. That is what we put in the report. So we need to be laser focus on what our objectives are and try really to implement those and try to be to work towards that. And focus requires selection. So we cannot 7 priorities maybe are just too many. They are all important, but maybe we need to prioritize them and see, okay, this is an area where we can actually advance more now. So we need to prioritize that now. The rest will remain a priority, but maybe it's more for the medium long term. So take advantage and try to be as flexible as possible while embracing the European complexity. And I fully agree. I mean, the European Union is complex. That is also its strengths, because bringing together all these different actors is what makes Europe Europe and an actor that can act on different level, on different front with a certain level of resources as well. So try to embrace this complexity, but try at the same time to make it easier again for our partners to work with us in that sense. I think remain very important. And I will just conclude by saying that quoting Ria in this case, saying India has the regional familiarity, and this is what Europe doesn't necessarily have, or some countries might have in certain region, but Europe as a whole need to learn more from the countries that are there, that engage regularly with other partners in the region with whom we struggle a bit more. So the cooperation is important, not only in terms of development, not only in terms of, which of course is very important, but not only in terms of reducing excessive dependencies. Is also useful for Europe to then learn how the region work and try to be more effective across the board. And yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you. If I may quickly respond to that, India and the European Union, it was at my time that I recommended and we drafted the India-EU roadmap to 2025, which was signed during a summit in 2020. I'm mentioning that because it was decided by a president of the Commission and our Prime Minister in February this year that in the next similar summit, there'll be a new strategic agenda. But in the existing roadmap, we have about 112 paragraphs where we are talking about the areas where we will cooperate. And among those many paragraphs which show the wide range of our cooperation and the potential, there are many elements of triangular cooperation. Now, EU being one of the biggest trading partners of, the biggest trading partner of the about 72 to 80 countries that it trades with, is also a donor, a biggest donor with those countries, and also therefore the most influential on those with those countries. So to have consultations with those countries should not be difficult at all. And so a better consultation process where you ask the countries what do they want, what will they value, and helps them to buy in. And then we help them to create the capability and the capacity to not only buy in, not only decide, but also sustain the projects once they have been initiated. So all this counts for success of the project, because then you get public sector participation from EU, from India, and from the beneficiary country, where you have investment flows also, and then subsequently trade flows also. So it's all got to come together much better. But I'd like to say I'm very, very sort of optimistic, especially now that there are reports like yours where, it's pointed out that these are the areas where things could be done better. But let me ask all the three panelists very quickly, what are the global gateway projects that you would like to see prioritized over the next 2-3 years? I mean, if you had to make recommendations for better strategic synergy, because we feel that strategic synergy is most important for the success of this global gateway project. And then are there some things that you think should be prioritized, some kind of projects that should be prioritized? Or am I asking a very difficult question? May I start with Mr. Reinhard Butikofer on this?
Thank you, Ambassador. Before I answer your question, I would like to point out that at the beginning of October, the European Commission is organizing the second Global Gateway Forum. The first one happened in 2023. And this year, beginning of October, there will be a sequel. And I'm not sure that all of you have been aware of this, but if you're interested to participate in that conversation, I would really advise you to either let me help you in contacting Commission or go there directly, because I did that broader conversation in Brussels in October. Coming back to your question, Ambassador, I give you an example where I would put an emphasis. We're experiencing presently that globally a lot of countries are being blackmailed by China, and I just call it by name, being blackmailed by China with regard to rare earth supply, which are industrially relevant across the board. Now, China is not monopolizing global rare earth mining, but it's quasi-monopolizing rare earth processing. I think one goal of trusted connectivity projects under Global Gateway and in collaboration with like-minded partners could be to reduce that kind of dependency. So why not team up with resource-rich countries that would be willing to move into processing because they want a bigger share of value added, and in this way help those countries develop their own industry, whereas on the other hand, guaranteeing that there is access to sources that are not completely controlled by the Chinese. I think that could be of strategic relevancy to so many countries that I think this would be a worthy goal.
Yes, indeed, even to India. And I suppose that's another reason why we say strategic synergies. Dr. Julia, would you like to come in, and Ms. Riya Sinha?
Yeah, this is indeed a very difficult question that you ask us. But I think, the one that I would like to prioritize is, the ones that are most promising, again, because of this need of prioritizing a little bit. And to me, all the discussions around digital infrastructure are really promising because, again, they show weaknesses that we can overcome by collaborating. And there are already a platform where we can discuss further with India and also expanding it again to other partners. So I think it has many elements in a sense that suggest potential success. We already have a platform where we can discuss. There is a feel of a need to collaborate more on those issues because they are pressing. And again, there are ongoing initiatives that makes it promising. So I think that would be my choice.
Thank you. And Ms. Riya Sinha, would you like to come in here?
Yes, I'd like to echo Julia in the sense that digital infrastructure is one of the sectors that need to be prioritized across the board, across the identified regions of the global gateway that they want to operate in. But also the priority sectors will vary in terms of where they operate. And for example, Mr. Butikofer did mention about the rare earth, and India is also looking at Africa in terms of rare earth mining and extraction. A lot of our private companies are going there. One of the missing elements there, for example, for prioritization could be the logistics part of it. How do you build logistics internally in these countries, the transportation corridors for extraction, for extraction, and how do they reach the ports, for example? I think that's a missing link. That is an area of focus here. But also in terms of digital infrastructure, where India and EU can bring in expertise, can take it very effectively to countries in the Indo-Pacific region, because if you combine India's digital public infrastructure, which has been very successful, with the EU's strong regulatory expertise in data protection and privacy, this is something that's going to be extremely welcome, and particularly in India's neighborhood, that are very concerned about, even if we get the digital public infrastructure, how do we how do we ensure data protection and privacy? So there's a good combination of elements that can happen over there, and that should be prioritized.
Thank you. That's a very great suggestion. And how, may I ask you, Ms. Riya, how is the global gateway perceived by the region's partners in, the institutions and the associations like ASEAN? And then are there case studies to show outcomes and case studies to identify areas where, the local government Or how do you feel that the local governments who are partner governments, how do they perceive the Global Gateway Initiative? So local governments and local regional associations.
So this is a little tricky because Global Gateway, even though let's say India is talking a lot about it, the bigger countries are talking a lot about it, or the beneficiary countries where the projects are actually based are talking a lot about it, but the smaller countries in the region, which haven't been beneficiaries so far, like I said, in the South Asian region, there are just 6 projects, 2 in Bangladesh, 2 in Nepal, 2 with India, right? So there isn't enough known about Global Gateway, what the elements are, what its focus is. There's not enough written about Global Gateway to actually have a point of view in that sense. Yes, it is viewed as a strategic alternative to Chinese-led initiatives, to the BRI, for example, in the Indo-Pacific. It is, I mean, Global Gateway also coordinates with the G7's Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investments as well, which is very clear on being an alternative to China's BRI. So that kind of messaging does exist. Now in South Asia and ASEAN regions, there is a they would welcome Global Gateway investments in infrastructure, in education, in digital connectivity, but they need to be wary of geopolitical signaling. None of the countries in this region want to be caught in in a West and China geopolitical rivalry in the Indo-Pacific, because they are also beneficiary countries from some of the Chinese projects, and they don't want to be caught in the middle of that. So what is important here is to emphasize under the Global Gateway, development first, partnership-based branding, work through existing bilateral and multilateral frameworks. And the EU, for example, has something called multi-annual indicative programs in Sri Lanka, in Bhutan, in Nepal. And these also focus on some of the areas that Global Gateway focuses on, for example. Focusing on these, on regional development strategies, on climate action plan, like you were mentioning, like what are the needs of this region? You need partner countries to be on board when deciding, the beneficiary countries to be on board when deciding. So local branding and ownership is very critical to avoiding perceptions of external geopolitical agendas in this region when it comes to Global Gateway doing more projects in this particular part of the world.
Yes, I would strongly agree with that. As having been a practitioner, not only with the European Union as a partner, but with other major global players, I think it's very, very important to have proper projection of the projects, the areas, the sectors, and also the successful outcomes, because that's when you guarantee a better participation. And then, of course, as you mentioned, I heartily agree that prioritization, that's what India has always done right from the time that we gained our freedom. We always wanted to help brother countries in the global south with what they need. They would say, this is what we need. We never prescribed. So that is an automatic buy-in. And then we also have always concentrated on capacity building. So that was a very valuable sort of an input. I am confident that looking at your recommendations in your report and other previous reports would go a long way in achieving tangible outcomes and build confidence and enhance a robust participation, not only in Team Europe, as President of the Commission calls it, but also in beneficiary countries. If I may, I'm looking at the time. I think it's important now to look at the questions that have come in from the participants. Mr. Jochen, could you just help me with the questions? I'm trying to see the questions from the participants. I think there are about, I see, just a moment. One is, to what extent can the Global Gateway serve as a strategic counterbalance to China's infrastructure diplomacy, and what role does India play in legitimizing this normative alternative? Then I see another question. What scope do you see for trilateral cooperation? The first question, I didn't mention the name because it was anonymous, but Mr. Shashank Tiwari asks, what scope do you see for trilateral cooperation on the global gateway, such as India, EU, Japan, or India, ASEAN, India, EU, ASEAN, to operationalize connectivity projects in strategically sensitive Indo-Pacific regions? And then another anonymous question, what can be the function of Northeast India in future global gateway projects and policies? These are very stimulating questions. Who would like to, may I put the first one to Mr. Reinhard Butikofer. To what extent will the project, the initiative, serve to counterbalance China's infrastructure diplomacy? You have mentioned this in part, but here the question is, what role does can India play in legitimizing this normative alternative? What is your view on this?
I would start from a point of departure that simply says there are so many strategic urgencies around the globe to develop infrastructure that there is space for a lot of good initiatives. And I would not want to focus the activities on the global gateway on countering China.
Exactly.
I would want to focus the activities on fulfilling as best we can some of the needs that have been aptly described in so many cases. So maybe countries want to choose working with China and working with us. That's their choice, but we want to make them an offer. And if by making them an offer, we can enhance their self-determination and their autonomy and maybe give them a better chance of avoiding new dependencies, then I would welcome that. But the projects should make sense in helping countries to develop, and they're not designed to counter China. But I would not negate that by offering such alternatives, we're of course limiting the opportunities for China to coerce countries. And we know many examples where China has indeed coerced countries because of their economic dependency. So I think good intentioned win-win-win, as you said, Ambassador, in the beginning, a good intentioned win-win-win also helps pushing back against schemes of dominance.
Yes, and I think in today's globalized world, there is a need to be able to work together and in a very, very constructive and a very positive way. And I fully associate myself with all your remarks, Mr. Butikofer. Can we go to the next question? What scope do you see for trilateral cooperation under the Global Gateway? Can I put this to Dr. Julia? Whether trilateral cooperation with India, EU, Japan, or India, EU, ASEAN, I mean, what do you think about that? Because the theme is strategic synergies. So I would say, why not? But would you like to just, comment and elaborate?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a very, very good question. And indeed, I mean, there is always scope once again. I think what we were discussing before about the like-mindedness, this remains one element that needs to be tackled at a certain point. So in theory and maybe in practice as well, at a very practical level, there is scope for this cooperation and will be actually welcome. The question remains also how big strategic debates are also discussed then in this type of trilateral cooperation, right? I mean, the cooperation on the global gateway, as Mr. Butikofer said, is one element, is not the only element, and should be looked at in a more complex discussion. So in terms of how to expand, again, the engagement with countries with whom we share a lot in terms of like-mindedness, we also share a lot in terms of we are much stronger if we work together, especially in a moment where we face great power competition between the US and China. And we as Europeans are struggling with that. India is struggling with that. Japan is struggling with that. Other countries, ASEAN is also struggling, trying not to take side in this competition, but trying to be as autonomous as possible. One way is indeed to collaborate more, and indeed at trilateral level, the more we can expand, the more effective we could be. Then at the practical level, more can be done, but again, I think we should also ask ourselves how much complexity can we manage as well, because again, this is one element that we saw also. Complexity brings is a challenge sometimes. So of course, it's good in theory, and there is a willingness to collaborate more, but then we also need to assess how much complexity can we manage, how much complexity can we embrace. And then the risk is that we want to do something that is good on paper and that we should really, we believe should be done, but then the practical aspect of it becomes so complicated that then it doesn't advance and it remains a talk that we don't walk, quoting again Mr. Butikofer. So I think we should find a way in between. And here I'm not sure if maybe we should start smaller, or maybe we should start with already existing platform and see how we can mobilize those platforms to discuss further cooperation. Yeah, I'm a bit in between. On the one hand, I think it should be done and it's important to do it. On the other hand, I see the challenges there. So the question is how to overcome them. And let me also maybe respond or say just one thing about the first question on, the global gateway as a strategic counterbalance. I fully subscribe to the idea that it should not be seen as a counterbalance. That's not the objective. This is not something done against. And the main reason for that is also this will make our life much easier as European in the moment in which the global gateway is not advancing at the way we want, because we can simply say, of course, we are competing with others that have a totally different structure and they can push things in a totally different way. So this is why we are struggling, right? So I think, of course, there are elements where we want to differentiate ourselves, and this is important. But at the same time, this should not be a justification on why we have these challenges and the fact that we cannot overcome them. So it's not something done against, it's something that is done to build. And the moment in which is not advancing, we should ask ourselves why this is the case and what we can do better to advance. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. I heartily agree. And then I would just emphasize the point that, every, partner has a core competence and a great unique strength. And then once all these strengths are complementary, they all come together. It is for the benefit of, the success of the area that we want to sort of develop, or the beneficiary country. And so there's every reason for everyone to come together, because everyone has to gain. Again, win-win-win. I have a question from Sai Supriya Avatapalli. Isn't ASEAN centrality the most important concept to keep Indo-Pacific sovereignty? How does EU look at it? Do they support it? I think I can say in one sentence that both India and the EU both agree on ASEAN centrality and in aligning and keeping our policies for that region in consonance with ASEAN's outlook for the Indo-Pacific. But if any of the discussants would like to add to that. And another question is, what can be the function of Northeast India in future global gateway projects and policies? And another anonymous attendee has said, Northeast has complex terrain, socio-political sensitivities and proximity to conflict-prone borders? How feasible is it for the global gateway to invest in sustainable infrastructure there? I would put the question to any speaker who would like to answer, but I'd like to quickly mention that there is a huge focus by the Global Gateway on India's Northeast. There are almost 120 projects there. I'm aware of that, and and mostly focused on connectivity and capacity building. I'm very, very positive and optimistic about the Northeast benefiting from the Global Gateway project. Dr. Julia, would you like to come in here, or Ms. Riya Sinha about the Northeast?
Let me come into the question on Northeast India. I mean, certainly Northeast is a very important part when it comes to India's regional connectivity initiatives. A lot of projects, a lot of new developments are happening in the Northeast. The Act East policy looks at the Northeast India as the gateway to Southeast Asia because of its location, but we're also aware that it is landlocked and there is more connectivity that's needed to be built within the Northeast region. And as Ambassador Kumar mentioned, there were several projects actually identified by the European Investment Bank as well in terms of how to invest in connectivity projects in the Northeast region. And the focus areas were infrastructure and digital connectivity. One of the recommendations in our report is expansion of the EU-Africa-India digital corridor via the Bay of Bengal to ASEAN. And this is where Northeast can be a good beneficiary in terms of having a good digital corridor over there. Japan is invested in building roads in the Northeast region, connecting it with different paths, even to a point of the Matarbari port in Bangladesh. What is really needed in that region is to make sure that a transport corridor exists, and for that digital connectivity is very important, and that is a sort of a low-hanging fruit when it comes to global gateway investment in the Northeast region currently. That's my short answer to that question.
Also, that new railway project, the new railway, Saira Bairangi, which was inaugurated a few days ago, connecting the Northeast to within India and to neighboring countries, and to other connectivity projects in the region. So it just has a huge influence on and a positive effect on development in that region. I don't have.
I comment on the ASEAN question.
Yes, please, Mr. Butikofer. Thank you.
I would like to add on to what you said, which I fully share. The EU has long upheld the principle of ASEAN centrality, and this has not only been paying lip service. For instance, if you look at the EU's very active trade policy, pursuing bilateral or plurilateral enhancement of trade relations, particularly with that region of the Asian continent, then putting that aspiration into that, just upholding us defend, as the person who asked the question said, to defend Indo-Pacific sovereignty. There have to be other elements also, in particular, since not all ASEAN countries are showing full solidarity where it would be needed. For instance, in the case of the Philippines, I think there would be much space for more solidarity with the Philippines from the other ASEAN countries. So ASEAN centrality can be a piece of the puzzle, but it's not the singular solution.
Indeed, indeed, and that's why participation, a more robust participation has to be worked on. Everyone has to see that the projects and the synergies are in their own interest. Mr. Jochen, are there any more questions from the audience? I don't see, I see one about the India-EU FTA, but we could leave that for another discussion. Of course, a good trade and investment flows between India and the EU will, of course, contribute to the strategic synergies really and create a good example and an atmosphere, an ecosystem for the Indo-Pacific as well. But I wouldn't say that it is directly connected right now. In fact, we've yet to get into the India-EU FTA, but it would have a very salubrious and a very positive effect on the entire, ecosystem in our region. Is there any other question from the audience that I may have missed? Mr. Jochen, have you spotted any other question?
No, I think that was the last question that's open. Otherwise, there wasn't any other questions. I think we can then maybe move towards the closing remarks and wrap up.
I'll do that. I must say that I would firstly like to thank the distinguished panelists for their remarks and comments, which have been very valuable. I'm glad that they are being recorded. We have at the end of this brief discussion greater clarity at a number of levels. Firstly, you all agree that the Global Gateway Initiative and India's Act East policy intersect and converge in a way that does reflect strategic synergies in this region, the Indo-Pacific. Secondly, you've pointed out areas of improvement, particularly that robust financing and project execution by member states and their institutions, as well as public and private sectors, will ensure that the projects are selected in a better and a more coherent way, properly financed, monitored, and then, as I mentioned, lead to outcomes that attract even better participation. And this, coupled with a closer alignment of digital infrastructure and AI and regulation, would definitely help in better results and better coordination and better regulation as well. And then, of course, more focus on resilient supply chains in the Indo-Pacific. And then I would always emphasize healthcare infrastructure to prevent or to prepare for health emergencies like we had at the time of the pandemic. At that time, we realized the vulnerability of being, of the smaller states, the developing countries, and of everyone who's not properly prepared. And then the creation of a monitoring system of indicators and criteria to track success in the India-EU alignment, India-EU cooperation, and India-EU and partner states triangular cooperation in this region. So to succeed, a close look at your recommendations would help in achieving tangible outcomes, build confidence, and enhance a robust participation of everyone concerned, of all the stakeholders. I must say that everyone should have a stake in the success of the global initiative. Everyone should have an ownership and feel that they have to benefit as well. So, the project started in 2021. We've learned a lot of lessons along the way, which will show us the way for, branding and building the local capacities in a sustainable way and branding the project better and projecting the successes better. So with these words, I wish the Global Gateway more success and all the possible goodwill and inputs which will make it, which will strengthen it. And with these words, I thank you all, the distinguished participants and the CSDR and the Heinrich Böll Stiftung. Thank you, Mr. Jochen. Thank you, Ms. Shalini.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you to our panelists and attendees for joining us today. It has been an incredibly timely and relevant conversation. I was recently at an event sort of marking the end of the Polish presidency, and I was actually very surprised to find the Global Gateway on a lot of people's minds at the discussion. But again, it has been an incredibly valuable discussion to have. Thank you, Ambassador Kumar, for an expertly moderated discussion, and to Mr. Butikofer as well. Practitioner views are always so valuable to have on the table and not easy to bring to the table on these discussions always. The Indo-Pacific continues to be an incredibly sort of complex factor in India-EU relations. At the same time, there is so much room here for it to be an avenue for uncontroversial collaboration. We look forward to continuing this engagement with HPS on this incredibly important relationship. We will be back in September with the third report of our series, so I hope everybody will stay tuned for that. Thank you.